All right, welcome to the LS Carlson Law Podcast. My name is Kirk Pearson. I'm the head of the litigation department and one of the partners here. And I'm sitting here with my colleague, Linda Honey. She's one of the estate planning attorney. And we're going to have a dialogue today about some of the services we offer at the firm and then some things to keep in mind for families as it pertains to estate planning, asset protection, things like that. Linda, could you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kirk. I am an estate planning attorney. I'm a certified specialist in this area, in estate planning, trust, and probate. However, I mainly practice estate planning and trusts. I've been doing this exclusively now for about almost 15 years. Been an attorney for 20. So did some contracts and business disputes initially, and then straight into estate planning and tax planning.
Can you explain a little bit about what estate planning entails?
Yeah. Well, when we talk about estate planning, there's two really big genres. Right? We're talking about one, asset protection, tax planning. That falls under estate planning, limiting your exposure, let's say, to certain liabilities. And then we're talking about your estate plan, right? Which is a revocable estate plan, a plan to, one, avoid probate, control your assets at your death, and make sure that your loved ones are taken care of if something happened to you, right? So when we talk about an estate plan, most of the time we're talking about that revocable estate plan that families have to protect their loved ones if something happened to them.
Yeah, and I know when I hear estate planning, I think most people think, older people whose kids are gone, what they're going to do to plan for their eventual passing. But what are some considerations that maybe younger parents or younger families may want to keep in mind when it comes to things like estate planning?
Right. Most people benefit from an estate plan, unless you want the state of California to decide what to happen to your property. Everyone has an estate plan. That's kind of what a lot of people aren't aware of. It's either you plan what happens at your death or the state of California gets to decide what happens at your death, right? So for young families, they might say, hey, I don't have a lot of wealth. I don't really need an estate plan, but it's not really wealth planning. It's not tax planning. It's not asset protection planning. It's planning so that your family is taken care of. It's planning so that your family doesn't have to go to probate. Right? It's making sure your minors have a named guardian, right? Or else you have family members who you might not want to take care of your kids coming to court saying, I want to now be the guardian of my children. There's a lot of clients that I have where the parents want to make sure that there's certain people that's disqualified for various reasons. Could be personality, could be religion, could be just difference in values that they have. Well, if you don't have an estate plan, you can't make those nominations or disqualifications. So for a lot of families with children, that ends up being a very, very important reason why you want an estate plan, that if you fall in that area. But most people, probate is probably the number one reason. No one wants to go to probate in California. It takes at least 18 months, usually a lot longer, a very expensive process.
Now, I want to go back and talk about guardianship in a minute, but can you explain a little bit more about what probate means or going through probate?
Absolutely. So a probate is a court process. Whether you have a will or not, you have to go through probate, and that's a common misconception people have, is that a will is sufficient. If you have a will, you don't have to go probated. Unfortunately, wills do get probated. That's why we have trust to avoid that. But what probate means, it's a court process where you have to present the decedent's case before the court. You have a person that's nominated as a personal representative that has to manage and administer the decedent's property. The court has to then, you have to provide an accounting to the court that the court has to approve before any property can get ultimately distributed to the beneficiaries, whether it's named in the will or whether it's by statute, according to California law. Now, that process takes about more than a year, usually in California. I think 18 months is the average. But depending on what your estate looks like I've had probate cases go 2-3 years.
And so the idea behind doing some estate planning really would be to kind of keep the process out of probate court and allow the parties to have more control over what is happening to their estate, whether it be their property, their family arrangements, things like that. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, we talked a little bit about the guardianship or who's ultimately going to take care of children in the event, say, both parents decease or there's nobody to take care of the children. I think a lot of us that have kids or who may be a little bit younger think, well, I don't have a lot of assets. You know, I came into this marriage with not a lot and we still don't have a lot. What's the point of having an estate plan? Can you elaborate a little bit more maybe on how parents can better arrange for the future of their children through the estate planning process?
Absolutely. So when you're dealing with young children, most parents just think, well, assets, or maybe they can think the person that's going to be taking care of your minors, your children. But that's two very distinct positions, right? So you'll have the person who'll be managing funds, whatever you have left for your children, the finances, and you'll have the person that's taking care of your children, physically taking care of your children. So that can be two different people who could occupy those positions, or it could be one person who does both. Now, you can nominate somebody. The court will always look at the person that you nominated. So it's not something where you nominate and that's it, that's the end of the line. That person is guaranteed to be the guardian. It's not the case because the California state has a vested interest in minors. They want to make sure that it's in the best interest of the child to be taken care of by the person that you nominate. Because times change, people change, things change, circumstances change. So when that time comes where you've passed away and now your children have to be with somebody because they're minors, they will take the parents' nomination seriously, but they will be before the court, so the court can confirm and verify that they're the best guardians for their children.
What could be the benefit of using a specialist like yourself, an actual attorney, say in lieu of, LegalZoom or an online service for arranging things like guardianships or, making estate planning decisions?
Right. The number one issue I see with, let's say, LegalZoom or these pre-drafted documents is user error, where they might check the wrong box or just not very familiar with estate planning and what that is. And when I get these documents and I try to explain to my clients what their trust says, because they were thinking of changing it or they were just concerned whether it still fit their needs, a lot of times I hear, well, I didn't know my trust said that, right? I think that's the number one thing I hear from these documents. And a lot of times it's because they've asked certain questions and they just didn't know the meaning of what's a marital trust, what's a decedent's trust, what's a Q-tip, what's the powers. Well, these asset protection sounds great, but when you do these types of asset protection planning for a couple, there's very specific consequences that happen, right? And they may not have known that when they were drafting it. So they drafted a trust that they really didn't want, and it didn't turn out the way they had hoped. Now they're stuck with this estate plan that they didn't know, and a lot of times I have to go to court and try to unwind some of them.
Okay. Yeah. And going to court is something where you would be better suited to have an actual attorney representing you in any case.
Right. And the goal is you want to avoid that. It's expensive. If you spend the extra time to talk to an attorney, right, it would cost you all of that headache and the extra time, money, everything to correct a mistake that happened.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people think that they can save some money up front, which can end up costing them a lot more money or headache down the line by, like you say, not having the kind of particularized, hands-on sort of response from an attorney.
Absolutely, especially an older trust. A lot of clients I have had older trusts. Unfortunately, one of the parent passed away or a spouse passed away, and the trust is not very tax effective. There's a lot of changes to tax law that happens every 4 to 8 years with different administrations, and when that happens, there's new laws that makes old trusts kind of very costly when it comes to taxes. So getting that looked at by an attorney is very important. Otherwise, you're wasting a lot of money on taxes that you could have avoided if you planned ahead.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to a question I was going to ask, which is the estate planning process something like a one and done sort of situation, or is it something that should be updated periodically or should be revisited from time to time?
Absolutely. So you want to revisit your estate planning whenever your life situation changes. You may be now in a taxable estate situation, and that number changes with the law. So you want to make sure that your estate works in the law that's in place. You want to make sure that you kind of pay attention to every change in administration, if there's changes to estate or gift tax laws, and make sure your trust fits under those laws so that it still makes sense.
Just kind of very quickly, what does the estate planning process look like? Let's say somebody came to you, they were a younger family, and they were looking to kind of start out with the estate planning process. Very quickly, what would that look like?
That looks like, well, first of all, we have a questionnaire so that it helps our families kind of gather information, think through questions that they might not have thought about, such as, well, who do I want to take care of my children if something happened to us? Who do I trust to manage my finances for me if I'm incapacitated at my death, or for my children, right? So this will kind of help clients kind of focus on what the questions that we're going to need to plan an estate. Once you've had a time to discuss with your family those your options, then we'll have a meeting where we kind of iron out the details. This meeting can take anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, depending on the questions you have, how detailed you want your trust terms to be. Or we'll spend whatever time is necessary to get those details ironed out. Once that's done, once I have all the information I need to draft the estate according to your wishes, it takes me, depending on my clients, week, 2 weeks, to draft the estate. Once you've had a chance to review, we'll meet, we'll talk on the phone, we'll Zoom, and we will go over your estate together so that you understand what these documents mean and how they work together. So you have trustees, you have powers of attorney, you have healthcare agents, nomination of guardians, all these different positions that most people might not be familiar with. When does a trustee act? When does a power of attorney act? So we'll kind of talk about how these different positions work together in your trust and the people that's occupying those positions, so that you understand how your estate works. It's important that you understand how your estate works. Most people just do it and they want to forget about it. But this is for the protection of your family. You want to make sure it's according to your wishes, and the people who's occupying those positions, you understand what they will be doing and what their job will be.
And part of your role then is to kind of guide them through the process of figuring out who should fill each role, what those roles do, and then kind of keeping track of that over time so that as their needs change, those needs can be met.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the hope.
Thank you. I think this is very helpful. I think too often people think that an estate plan is something they need to do in the future once they accumulate a certain level of assets or once they've reached retirement age or a certain age. And I think it's helpful to understand that, an estate plan can be helpful no matter what your situation is, regardless of what your assets may be or what your family situation may be, because it may help give you more control over what is ultimately going to happen with your estate in the event that you die or in the event that even you're incapacitated. But thank you for your time, Linda, and we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you, Kirk.